Good afternoon. Welcome to today's alumni session. The focus of today will be driving a culture of performance, attitude, and outcomes. We have Blake Redding from McKeon and Peter McKeon from Salesmasters. A couple of other points. The next QL event will be on Thursday, the 12th of May. I'd like to introduce Linda Scott, our Queensland Leaders alumni facilitator for today. And just to remind everyone, as we come to the end of the session, just on the app, just to do your feedback and that for us, you get your green tick and you can have as much as you want to drink. Without the green tick, unfortunately. So enjoy yourself. Thanks very much, Linda.
Thanks, James. Welcome, everyone. And it's great to have you all in the room today. And I just want to welcome you and acknowledge you all for being here. You could be anywhere else. You could be at your business, with your teams, with your customers, but you're choosing to be here in the room. That says a lot about you. It says that you're committed to your personal growth. It says that you're committed to your professional growth. And for this room, it's connecting with like-minded peers. So just a reminder of the standards in the room. Please lean in, get involved. The more that you participate, the more value you're going to get out of the time, energy, and money that you've invested in being here in the room. So we do have the topic that James just read, but we've slightly amended it because we didn't like it. So between the three of us, it is with the driving a culture of performance, attitude, outcome, and culture. That's what they came up with. And the three of us have added to that and said, understanding how the world of B2B sales has changed and the impact this has had on culture. So we're combining sales and culture. And we're going to kick off with Peter. And Peter is going to talk to us about sales transformation. And then Blake is going to add to that about how that's impacting HR and culture. So how it's going to run, they're going to talk for 5-7 minutes, whatever it is. And then we've got a great activity and table discussion for you guys to dive into today. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Linda. Thank you for the applause. As I always say, I take it at the start, I mightn't get it at the end. So thanks very much for giving up your valuable time. I guess it's my responsibility in conjunction with Blake to make it as valuable as I possibly can. It's quite timely, actually, that this topic about how the world of B2B sales has transformed. It was just this morning at 10 o'clock, I did a hour-long webinar to a group of individuals and businesses about this very topic. And for those of you that know me and know how I roll, I typically don't have a note, but because this is quite data rich in some of the statistics, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that the information I give you is very accurate. I think it's fair to say that all of us in this room have identified that COVID-19 has really changed the way that many businesses sell and many buyers buy. It may not be that evident to you and your business right now at the moment, but make no mistake, it has shifted. The relevance of salespeople today has become less and less. In terms of salespeople achieving quota pre-COVID-19, it was 72%. End of last financial year, the number of salespeople who met or exceeded their quota or sales targets was 53%. So it shifted. And one of the reasons for that is the way that people buy, and importantly, one of the ways, and the way that sellers, people like you and I, engage with their customers. It'll also come as no surprise that this is in sales. I can't talk about other parts of a business, but in terms of sales, 81% of salespeople who were interviewed in Australia recently, a survey of 14,000 people, 81% of them said that they would prefer to work either at home or in more of a blended solution, which was at home and at work. I see a number of you nodding your heads with that. And I must admit, just to be totally transparent here, I was not a supporter of that initially. I just could not understand how the rigors of a sales environment could not just meet but thrive in a blended environment, stroke digital environment. So I took the time of doing a lot of deep diving and research and discovery. And what I've come up with is that the technologies have moved on so much that your line of sight for your salespeople working from home, or maybe 1 or 2 days in the office, can not just be equal to what you currently enjoy, it can be substantially more. At the end of the day, salespeople ultimately are judged on outcome. And it's very, very easy to quickly identify and measure whether or not an individual is meeting his or her outcomes and what support or otherwise do they need. It's also interesting in these times in the last couple of years, as the founder of Salesmasters, 75%, a little over actually, of the inquiry that we get in terms of business issues are how do we increase win ratios. There's a lot of people out there doing a lot of quoting and hoping at the moment, but their win ratios are not where they were or indeed where they could or should be. So today I'd like to take the liberty of giving you a couple of insights into what you could potentially do around that. Data. If you haven't bought the story yet, I strongly recommend that you get on board with it. Data matters. As a matter of fact, there was a really interesting piece of research which all of you can download from Salesforce last month or the month before about how important data and analytics were in the sales process in 2022 and moving forward. As a matter of fact, they've identified that data-rich cultures, which Blake will talk more about shortly, have 162% more probability of meeting or exceeding targets than those that don't. And one of the ways that you can identify, you still got me? One of the ways that you can identify whether or not you are part of or leading a data-rich culture is by the use of sales stacks. And what I mean by that, it's simply a terminology of what technologies that you're using in your sales endeavors today. And I think most of us in this room would be fairly familiar with the CRM. For my bet, my philosophy on CRM is very simple. Those of you that know me, the CRM for me is the central place of all truth in a business. Not some, not most, but of all truth. If it is not in the CRM, it simply doesn't exist. And what's been really unfortunate, the CRM's really been the poor orphan, I would call it, over the last couple of decades. It was sold and viewed by many salespeople as a tool of gotcha, a tool of big brother looking, a tool of discipline, and a tool of accountability, tool of fault, rather than a tool of richness and able to bring value both to their customers and by extension their businesses. And so for those of you that have a CRM in your business, it's very, very important that you align your team, if required, or realign them to the value proposition behind a CRM. And if you don't have a CRM, I worked closely with the Leaders client last year. It's very easy to go out and just get one. Well, there's a lot more to it. So if you need some help, do some research, and I'll be happy to allocate some time for anyone in this room to have a quick 20 or 30-minute Zoom call with you to give you a heads up about not just what to do, but importantly, what not to do. So CRMs would be a classic piece of sales tech that most of us would have. Most of us would be certainly on LinkedIn, or if not, a contributor to LinkedIn Navigator. Most of us would subscribe to some sort of potentially, whether it be Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Most of us would have explored potential video, which is the new platform for communication now, whether that be Vidyard or Loom. Most of us would have access to some sort of sales automation or email automation or something like that. So tech stacks are important, but here's the next generation. I'm working with a client at the moment, beg your pardon, with a provider at the moment out of the UK. What we do as a company often for salespeople is we get them to record their telephone conversations or their sales interactions, and they send us the data on an audio file or a video file or whatever the case may be. And we unpack that, and then we identify areas of development, and then we get he or she or them on a call. We replay the call, and then we identify. It's a really, really good, immediate, NIN, need it now, way of developing someone very, very quickly. But it's very timely. So I'm now working with the company. This is the next generation of I'm trying to get you to think, what do you need in your business? So as a sales training and consulting organization, what I need in my business is ways to save my clients time and money. Because I know if I can go to any CEO or business leader with the value proposition that will either increase profits or decrease expenses, that saves them time and money, I'll at least get 10 minutes of their time. So I'm working with an organization now where when the call comes in using artificial intelligence, let's say it was a call that we wanted to critique on their capacity to qualify an opportunity. around what we call Salesmasters, the BAT, B-A-T, which is around budget, authority, and time frame. Rather than listening to that whole call for 20 minutes, 35 minutes, whatever it may be, this artificial intelligence, this technology will critique the entire call. It will take right down to the second how much the salesperson was speaking, how much the opportunity or the customer was speaking, and it will look for pre-programmed words around budget, authority, and time frame, and clearly identify what was the strength and the impact of that particular delivery. We can then look at that information, go straight to the client or straight to the salesperson and have a 10, 12, 15-minute, low-cost, need-it-now type conversation that will really bring them up to speed. So I'm sharing that story with you for you to start thinking, what are some of the next generation sales technologies and/or stacks and sales technologies or software that you can add to your situation? One of the challenges, before I hand it over to Blake, around the culture piece of this is salespeople, for some people, they struggle working from home. They may not tell you, but they struggle. We use assessments to really critique how resilient are people, how agile are they, how confident are they. And some of these poor buggers are at home right now doing their best, but they're in a world of pain. One of the biggest opportunities for sales masters in the last 2 years, we've just employed a second organizational psychologist to go out and deliver sales confidence and sales resilience programs for people. And it is profound, the impact that it's having on salespeople, because all they need is a bit of support and a bit of help. And from a cultural perspective, if you can get your team more confident, more resilient, buying into that data-centric type of culture, it is profound. Not some improvement, not a bit of improvement, but a profound improvement in terms of what your business could do. And here's the kicker. With respect, in my experience, most people are yet to pick the baton up and run with it. So for me, as part of the leaders community, I see a really, really big advantage there to embrace that. So I hope that brought you a bit of value, and I'll now hand it over to Blake to talk a bit about the culture.
Thanks, Peter. Always enjoy listening to Peter's presentations, and when we were putting this together in terms of how culture fits in, I think it was where the way that we thought the story could help boost Peter's messaging was that sense of where the choice around is how important is sales to our business, and the way or where culture will impact it sort of picking up and launching next. And I think where there's different people around the room who some of us have leadership teams, some of us will be owners and really have a next level down who we task with what needs to be done. So this is where, from a culture perspective, it will be different depending on the structure of your business, but there's a certain, I guess, rhythm or system to the way that culture will work. And where Peter used that term, sales culture, and whether we're working with clients in the space of safety culture, sales culture, commercial culture, like there will be a theme or a business priority that's driving, culture at any particular time. And so that sort of presents the first barrier, where culture will get in the way. And I think culture is one of these overused terms, and you just sort of cross out culture, replace it with behavior, and so culture is the behavior that we're expected to display to fit in. And what that means is that culture is a group thing. So depending on what group you're in, will decide the types of behaviors that you should display to fit in. And then the risk that happens if you do stuff that doesn't fit in. Humans hate not fitting in, so we will tend to do stuff, that helps us fit into the bigger groups. So that's when we talk about sales culture. What are the behaviors that we're expected to display? But the first obstacle is that, as if I'm a business owner and decide sales is the point that we have to put the accelerator on to save time, increase our profits, or reduce expenses. Once we make that decision, we're kind of through that change curve and start to perhaps move into the space of advising the business what needs to happen. And so this is where we kind of hit the first way to get through that obstacle. Is that it sounds a bit fluffy, but it is, what's the story? We need to sort of nail the story about how sales is fitting into everything, not just the sales team. Because a story that I heard that really resonated with me around this topic was Mars Group. So Mars Group is a family-owned business, one of the largest in the world, and has gone through many ups and downs. And people who've worked there will say, there's three things that really matter at Mars Group. One is the customer, in that everything must really support and serve the customer, because without them, we're not in business. The other aspect is product quality, because we sell food, and if we don't meet the quality standards or expectations, we can go out of business. And the third one is profitability. And some people would say, well, the profitability, how do you fit that into the culture story? Because it's about making money, and people want something greater. But their story behind it is that most people here were here at the time where we nearly went broke, and we weren't meeting our profit margins, and we had to let a lot of good people go. And it was painful, and some really good people didn't make it through. None of us want to go back to that. So it sort of creates this sentiment of being unapologetic for prioritizing profitability in terms of the business results and outcomes. So I think that first barrier of, once we recognize that priority, sales, we must, switch gears in that, whether it's through the CRM, whether it's through our data stacks, this obstacle around what's in it for me when it's not directly impacting my back pocket. And it must be that genuine sort of culture story, and if we can't come up with that, we will always be pushing, and pushing and pushing. Once we get through the story piece, this sort of next barrier will sort of hit into your leadership team, and this will vary depending on the structure of your business. But this obstacle is what we call the first team dilemma. Not my sort of language. There's Peter Lencioni sort of uses this language where leaders will have a dilemma where, who's my number one team? Where do I prioritize my functional team? So if I'm the sales manager, am I prioritizing the sales function, or is it the leadership team that I'm a part of? And most managers, if you ask the question, who's your number one team, will say sales team, the functional team that I lead, because that's my bread and butter. That's how I got up in the business. This is how I hit my results, and I'll always fight for my function. And that's going to undermine any effort to really push a business transformation around a particular theme, because, again, it will then be the owner and the sales manager pushing an agenda, whether it's the CRM, the data. And if we can't get through that barrier, it will always be a push. So I think that's where we connect into sort of how do you get through that obstacle, is where we sort of focus in on that, what we call that leadership culture. So when we're building the story, it's all of us in the room, and we're creating rules or standards or the culture at that leadership level that really enables them to, when we step into the room as a leadership team, it's about the business. It isn't about reporting in on my team's performance and what's wrong in our turf, because you can sort through that in a report. The thinking, the agenda, the focus is more at that business level. And so then when we sort of slip through that barrier, the next piece is around creating, I guess, the right environment, for the behavior change to happen. And so in the sales context, there's tends to be two ways to go, and then somewhere in between. But one way to go is more around the sense of the hero, so we hire the heroes who can really achieve most of the budget, and they're the high performers. They might not fit in culturally. They might not align with where we want to go, but they get the results in. And we kind of make exceptions for them because of the results that they generate. And that is something that is unsustainable, and will, particularly in this current environment where most people are struggling to find the right people, it will exacerbate that problem. And so that's where we say the other avenue is more the scientific one, which is about, what are how are we creating an environment that's nudging or influencing the behavior, whether it's sales, safety, or it's sales and safety, whatever our culture story is, that points us in the right direction. And so this is where it does tap into that sense of, when we talk about metrics, if it is, win ratios, or the particular behaviors that, a business like Peter's will be tracking to lift, what are the goals? How are we measuring it? How are we getting feedback on our progress and performance? Because if we start to, whatever we measure matters, and so we can't measure everything. All we do measure, really does matter. And I think the other part of the culture piece, which I think through these times when talking to people, someone said to me, I'm sick of living through a time that people in the future are going to look back on and say, oh, it would have been interesting to live in through that period, where these issues are just lining up, making it tough. But through these times, the other piece to the culture that I see as make or break is the coaching culture. So this is this sort of piece that where any of us sort of hit an obstacle, unexpected or expected, that we kind of look beside us and we find ourselves in a room, work out how we're going to get through this obstacle, as opposed to if we're not collectively coaching each other through, glad that's not me, and you get teams or groups isolated, really in a crisis mode, trying to protect or rebuild their patch, and other people stepping back. So I guess that's the other sort of culture moment of truth, that we will sort of slip through that will decide whether or not we can really build, that business performance on the back of a decision that's made at that strategic level that must be executed to drive profits. Cool.
So what we thought we'd do now is see if we can lift the bonnet on a couple of issues. I think on your tables is this handout, and we're going to do a group exercise broken down by each table. And Blake and I got together and we just kind of did a bit of a brainstorm on what were some of the common issues that people were coming to McKeon and Salesmasters with today. And that's a list of them. There's many others, but that's some of the headline lists. And we thought as a group, if you would like to pick a couple, unpack them, have a discussion. What's working for you? What are you doing about that particular issue? Is that affecting you? Is it something that could be pending? And then at the end of that, we'd like to open it up to a Q&A and see if we can unpack any specific questions around any of that or anything else that we've spoken about. Okay, so the task was to identify one or two of the typical business problems that McKeon and Salesmasters, our clients, come to us with, and to unpack that in a bit more detail and then have a bit of a Q&A. So Linda has the microphone, so she will come to you, and who would like to kick it off with a question?
We didn't really answer your questions. We thought we'd just change it up and do something different.
Fantastic. I like the spur of the moment. And that's exactly what Carroll Consulting does so well.
Exactly. Thank you. I guess one of the questions was, or scenarios that we sort of all found, was being subject matter experts in our own business and doing sales calls ourselves, employing people that weren't as knowledgeable as us in the business and not truly understanding how to ask the right questions, promising what couldn't be delivered. So how do you scale your business process? So I guess that's an effective implement a sales process.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. SMEs in particular, most, not all, but most SMEs in particular do a really, really poor job of this, and it's called sales induction. And what that means is that, like, when most people turn up to start in a sales role, or any role for that matter, in your business, they want a couple of things. The first thing I think that they want is they want to do a good job. I think the second thing that they want is they want to be recognized for doing a good job. I think that they want to be fairly compensated for doing a good job. And they want a manager or a leader that walks his or her talk and shows them what good looks like. And when people go into an SME in particular, as opposed to a larger organization or a large corporate, there's very, very little in writing in terms of induction. And so it's typically the buddy system, and they're learning behaviors, some of them appropriate, some of them not so appropriate, from other colleagues. There's the typical, well, we'll give them a couple of weeks to get their feet under the desk. So the bottom line, the answer to the question lies in allocating time and money to write a documented, doesn't have to be War and Peace, but a documented induction process. And it could include things like some sales aids around the technical knowledge that you just mentioned before, to give them a story card so they've got some richness and some depth of breadth of insight into some of these topics that you're referring to. Have some sort of a sales process. This is kind of how we go about things here at Carroll Consulting. This is our start and our middle and our end. Because if you do not demonstrate to them what good to great looks like, what they will do is they will do their best. And that's where you get this convoluted, mixed up, culturally infected kind of mishmash of everyone running their own race. That's where mediocrity is born. And if you can just understand the value of writing a really good induction program, it's not expensive. It just requires the time. And again, busy people in a time-poor world, I get that. But if you don't do it, it's going to be problematic. And it's a very, very hard problem to solve unless you've got something documented that is gives them the clarity that they're looking for. Good question. Have you got anything to add on the cultural side of that in terms of induction?
It's probably a bit specific to consulting as an industry, where if we're selling a product, it's different to selling a service. And often I can speak a bit biasing being in consulting is that one of the problems, the things that we did was a bit of an assumption that the way that directors or owners sell is a way that new consultants can sell. And it created a real, where we need the skill of a consultant, a senior consultant in ASAP to execute tough projects. But they have to then sell, to meet their budgets quite quickly. And so this is where we talk about the sales process. Well, what does good sales look like at different levels is key. Because what we were finding was that our new entrants were just becoming really dissatisfied because they couldn't meet the standards that the owners could, and they were holding them to that standard. So we sort of implemented storytelling as a bit of a tech. So this thing called beers. Was it blood, sweat, and beers? So it was a bit about a bit of a check-in where people would share stories about where we actually made errors and mistakes and what we learned from them, to try and help people who are more newer to the business to appreciate that, we used to, but we don't anymore expect this standard. So incorporating that storytelling also helps with people understanding the why, behind the way that we do things, and then creates a space to ask questions and actually raise issues that they're having at that level. I think when we're selling products.
And the only other thing I would add is to what Blake mentioned in his presentation about the importance of coaching. Look, it's a tough gig being a business leader. We all get it, but if we're not coaching them, you need to accept that they're probably learning the wrong habits. And if you truly want to build sustainability and you really want to build growth, you or one of your team needs to be the internal promoter of whatever is the topic that needs to be conveyed. Because if not, as I said earlier, they've got no option other than to leave it up to themselves. And again, that's just where mediocrity is born. So coaching as well.
And you also need to be the benchmark of excellence. Because that's what they're going to be aiming for. And anything you do more than twice, you put your system in place so they know how to do the doing. And they know what's expected, and they know what success looks like. And then you're giving them every opportunity to flourish and thrive and to get the outcomes that you want. Awesome.
Other question? Hey, Michelle.
One of the biggest challenges we've found, and actually a few people, is that there is so much business coming through. I guess just some feedback around how to say no to the right stuff, how to also be sustainable, provide quality products, and keep your people okay while everyone's dying, Yeah.
Yeah. Couple of things around that. First off, be really, really clear as a business on what your buyer persona is. I don't know about you, but for us as sales masters, we're very clear. We're certainly not all things to all people. We understand the types of businesses that work best with us. So, there are many proposals where people come to us and say, we would like this or like that. And it's more of a they might be looking for a sheep dip approach, which won't drive any behavioral change, no sustainability, waste of our clients' money and our time. So the answer would be no. So the answer to the question lies in really being clear about who you are and the lane that you bowl in. That's the first thing. Second thing, when those opportunities present, it's having a qualification criteria